Hello, welcome to our worship facility webinar, Personal Monitors, How to Achieve a Better Mix, with Andy Swanson of All Clear Audio. I'm Gene Last, editor of Worship Facility. Andy is well known as a performer, a worship leader, and an audio expert. Andy, why don't you get us started?
Thanks, Gene. And thanks all you for being here. Welcome. Today we're going to be talking about personal monitor mixes and how to get a good personal monitor mix. There's a lot of things that go into a personal monitor mix. In fact, you could almost say that a personal monitor mix is anything but personal. So we're going to jump into some of the reasons why, and I'm going to have you just kind of, as we go through some of this, some of it may not make sense as to why we're talking about it, but I promise you it's going to all make sense. We're going to cover a few things like what do we need before we get to our personal monitor mix, how to mix a monitor mix, and then we'll go into a little bit about each instrumental or each person in the band, what they need to hear, and what's the key things that they're looking for in their mix. We'll have some resources available. We'll toss up a QR code here that you can download, just a short kind of overview of this, and that way you can hand it out to your team or those who didn't come here, aren't in the webinar. And yeah, it's going to be, hopefully it's going to be helpful. Hopefully it's going to be something that will help take your personal monitor mixes and your performances, to that next level, if you will. So the first thing that we always say is that your best mix starts before Sunday. And I don't know, I'm sure you've noticed, but it's not uncommon that you go through, let's say you do practice on Friday or practice on Saturday, even let's say Sunday morning. You're doing your rehearsal and you're going through and you set up your personal monitor mix and everything seems great. Then all of a sudden you start playing for the service and everything kind of gets blown out. And all of a sudden levels are off and you don't know why. We're going to go over that, what that is, why that happens. But that's why we kind of say that your best mix is going to start before Sunday. It's going to start during your rehearsal. And so that's what we're going to go over here. First thing I want to emphasize is the importance of planning and pre-planning. For those of you who are on worship teams or in charge of getting music out or who are the leaders, how early does the band get the music? What formats? Are they in the right key? Do you require them to play like the recording, or are you going to kind of do your own thing? How many songs are you learning per month? Those kind of things. All of that actually does impact your personal monitor mix because it comes down to confidence. And we're going to talk about how confidence impacts your monitor mix here in a second. I also want to talk a little bit about, you'll hear me use the phrases practice and rehearsal. And in my mind, there's a big difference between practice and rehearsal. Practice is learning the song. Practice is what happens at home. And rehearsal is putting together what we all learned while we were practicing. So when we are running a rehearsal, it's important that everyone comes having practiced. Now, I know that that's not always the case. And in many churches, that's rarely the case, but it will impact your monitor mix. I'm serious, and we'll get into why that is. So when you have a rehearsal, first of all, like I mentioned, you have practice. That happens off campus, right? That's what happens at home. Then there's these other components of rehearsal. There is a line check. And that's where the tech is going through and making sure all of the cables are routed, all of the speakers are working, all the mics are working, everything that has a line is connected. Next, you have a sound check. And that's where you start to adjust levels, but mostly the tech is going to be adjusting levels, adjusting gain structures, all those kinds of things. And then you go into the rehearsal, and that's all the team members. It's where you go through your parts, the order, transition, any deviations from what we practiced, etc. So what I found in my experience is what we typically do is we do a brief sound check and a monitor mix. So everyone gets there and you get started. everyone's in their place. It's kind of like, all right, is everything working? And bass player's playing, guitar player's playing, doing their sound check. Typically, the tech might say, okay, bass play. The bass is playing, guitar is also playing. And they say, all right, keys play. You're playing the keys, guitar is also playing, etc. Right? So we do a brief sound check in a monitor mix. Then we practice our new songs. Then we quickly go over familiar songs. And then we do a quick run through the transitions. That's what I've seen how most rehearsals are run. So what's happening during that is players are focused on their chords and charts. You're looking down, you're staring, you're being very cautious as to what you're playing, especially if it's a new song. You're listening to yourself and not the team. You're thinking, am I playing the right notes? That kind of thing. If it's a new song, it's very timid. People are not wanting to step out and make a wrong note, so you kind of play half-hearted. You can't play to the room because there's no participants in the room, and everyone's dialing in a mix. So, as you're trying to dial in your mix, the bass player stops playing to dial in his mix, and of course the guitar player's noodling. Sorry, guitar players, but you are. So what is happening here is you end up having line check during the sound check time. You have sound check during the rehearsal time, and then rehearsal during the first service. Can anyone relate to that? It's happened to me more times than I can count. So then, when you come in on Sunday, everything is different. Like we mentioned, there's usually about a 10 decibel difference in the volume. Why is that? Well, so let's say you have rehearsal on Friday. You go through, everyone does the new song, figure out their parts, knows what they want to play. Now they go home and rehearse a little bit. They practice a little bit, right? So you have some personal practice time between the rehearsal and the service. There's a little bit of time to think and plan. Oh, I want to do this. Here's how here's the riff I want to play, etc. Now there's people in the seats. You've got some performance adrenaline. You're a little bit excited, right on the balls of your feet. And your confidence is increased because you kind of know what's going on now. All of those things add up to about a 10 decibel difference in your monitor volume. You're just like, I don't know why this changed. So what can we do to help with that? First, preparation. And mentioned that earlier, but make sure that everyone has stuff early so they have enough time to practice. Make sure all the songs are available before rehearsal. Provide a little bit of time up front for the bands and musicians to gel, to kind of get comfortable with each other. Do something fun, at the beginning. And we're going to see how that confidence is going to impact everyone's performance. Confidence that comes with being comfortable. And some of that starts with preparation. So prepare. Make sure everyone's got everything that they need before rehearsal. One of the quotes that I love is from Matt Redman. And he says, we're in the business of preparing a place to lead people into the presence of God. And I want to kind of tee this up this way because a lot of times I think, and this has certainly been my case, my mindset throughout different times as being a worship leader is that there is a curtain back here, like some stage curtain. And I'm going through and finding the part, finding where is it opening so that I can open it up, and God is behind there, and now I'm finding that part, and as a band we're leading people into the presence of God. I always had a little bit of a challenge with that though, because we know from scripture that God inhabits the praises of his people. Wherever two or more are gathered, there he is also. And so I was like, what am I leading them into if he's already here? So here's a little illustration. I think it's a little bit more like this. There's like those change things that you see at like a McDonald's where you can give to Ronald McDonald House. You can put in a coin and it goes in and it spins around and around and around and it funnels down into the little piggy bank there. Worship is more like that. People are coming into the service with all kinds of things on their mind. They're maybe had a fight in the car on the way to church, which if I ever fight with my wife, it's going to be during the drive to church. Maybe I can't find a parking space. All these visitors taking up all the parking, and I got to park out in the back 40. I'm dropping my kids off and one of them has a little bit of a runny nose and I'm just hoping they don't notice and call me and pull me out of service for it because now I'm going to have to miss the service or what. All of these things are going on in our minds as we come into a worship service. And it's up to us as worship leaders not to find where God is and lead people into it, but to help people focus on a God who is already there. And so what we're trying to do is minimize distractions and as quickly as possible bring people down where they're not thinking about their kids, they're not thinking about their fight, they're not thinking about the parking, they're not thinking about dinner plans, they're not thinking about all the times they told somebody we should hang out and you never have yet. All of those things funnel down until you're focused on just you and the very present God. In order to do that, we have to be confident. We have to know that we sound good. We have to be playing our best because just another little distraction added on to that can send people right back up. And then we got to bring them right back down into that recognizing the presence of God again. So here's some best practices for rehearsals. We're just going to go through this real quick because it does impact your personal monitor mix. Make sure everyone has enough time before rehearsal to practice the songs. Musicians, you got to learn the songs. Singers, you got to learn the songs. Don't rely on this confidence monitor. You have to know the songs. Things can go wrong with tech. They often do. Know the songs. Techs, the people in the back, learn the songs. You should have a copy of the songs also so that you know what's going on. You should be charting during rehearsal where stuff is going to increase, where it's going to decrease, who's playing what and when. It's very important. Next thing is this I find often gets missed. Give time up front to the techs. All right, techs show up before the band does usually. They're setting up they're usually doing their line checks, making sure everything works before the band even shows up. By the time you get there, the techs have probably been there for an hour or more already. So they're already into the mode. You come in as a worship team member, and if rehearsal starts at 8, you're there at 8, and getting everything set up, and the tech's just like, I'm ready for this thing to go. I've been here for a long time. This is a sidebar as a courtesy for everyone. If rehearsal starts at 8, that means rehearsal starts at 8. Show up early enough so that like the downbeat of the first thing can happen at 8. And it's not we all show up at 8, 8:15, 8:30 because we want to honor everybody's investment. And it actually matters to a personal monitor mix because when people are frustrated, it's not going to work out so well. Just telling you from experience. And when the techs are frustrated, there's going to be potential challenges that will impact you, and we'll get into that. So the techs show up, they get their line check. Now they're going to do a sound check with the band, okay? So rehearsal best practices, ensure there's enough time for the band to practice before rehearsal. Give upfront time to the techs. And during these tech time, the first, let's say 10 minutes of your rehearsal, no noodling. Guitar players, no noodling. Keyboard players, no noodling. Drummers, hands in your lap until you're called for. It's going to make everything go much quicker, and you're going to get into your actual rehearsal much quicker. When we play, now we're into the rehearsal. Show intensity and show volume. Try to play as loud as you can or as you are going to on a Sunday morning. Now here's a great tip. Rehearse a familiar song first. What happens typically during a rehearsal is we spend the most time on the song we don't know yet. That's a brand new song. And then we're going to go over the transitions. And then we'll go over the songs we're already familiar with, right? And then you kind of go over the transitions once more. But rehearse a familiar song first. When you rehearse that familiar song first, something everyone knows, they're going to be playing with confidence. They're going to be playing loudly. They're going to be playing with that show intensity. That way, when you're dialing in your personal monitor mix at that first time, you're dialing in at a confidence level where you're going to be on Sunday morning, and it will help reduce that 10 decibel creep. Create the monitor mixes on that familiar song. Make mistakes boldly. This is rehearsal. Just go for it. Be bold, even if you make a mistake. And when someone does make a mistake, we don't do the side eye. We don't turn real quick and stare at them. Mistakes are going to happen. It's a part of life. Just let it happen. All these things are going to lead to confidence. And when everyone is confident, everyone else is more confident. It just kind of feeds off each other. We're all one team. No one on the team is more important than another. And I say that because the techs, they actually need a voice. As a worship leader, if that's your role, make sure you're cultivating a relationship with your tech. They're an integral member of the team. I used to do, like when we would do a training like this at a church, or at a conference, I'd have people raise your hand. How many of you would consider the worship team and the tech team to be the same team, that even the techs are on the worship team? Every hand would go up. And I would say, keep your hand up if you invited the techs to the last worship retreat. Kind of come down. I don't do that anymore. It's not very Christ-like, I think, to single people out. But it just shows that we give lip service to the fact that we're all one team, but we're not actually acting like it. So it's very important that we act like that we're all on the same team. Techs need a voice. Converse with the techs about what role each person serves. If you're the worship leader, you can say, okay, here's how this is going to work. Or even during rehearsal, talking back to the tech saying, all right, so-and-so is going to lead this on acoustic guitar, but then we're going to switch over to electric guitar. So-and-so is going to lead this song on electric. So-and-so is going to lead this on keys. Keep that relationship open. Keep those conversations open. Include your techs in all worship team events, everything, invite them. And the reason is poor sound at the console, where the tech lives, is going to result in a poor monitor mix. It absolutely does, because what happens is your sound, what you're playing on stage, comes through the wires back to the board where he is. Now he's fiddling with it, the system is fiddling with it, and sending it back out to you, okay? So it's very, very important that the techs are able to get a good, we call it gain staging, but good volume levels to send back out to you. The reason, here's a text role. Let's just go. Here's a text role in your personal monitor mix, okay? Proper gain staging. When sound comes into the board, they need to make sure that the volumes are right and nice and hot. Everything in this world today is digital. Digital needs a really nice hot signal in order to have enough math to work with. So techs, use your preamps to get a nice hot signal level. Please do not use EQ to adjust your volumes. Let that happen on the gain staging process. Know where you're inserting your signal chain for monitors. So this is to the techs. What happens is your sound comes in and it goes through, here's like a typical chain. It comes in through a preamp, and then it will go into EQ and compression, and then it will go down into this, to the fader, the part that you all see, up and down thing. So know where you're inserting the signal, because if you're taking your monitor feed, right, what you're sending back to the stage after the fader, and digital consoles allow us to pick where that comes from. If we send it after the fader, then in the middle of a service, when you decrease somebody, all of their volume decreases in their personal monitor mix. So let's move that up the chain. Now, you can take it after EQ and compression. But if you change EQ during the service, it's going to change a personal monitor mix, and they're going to wonder what's going on. Most of the time, we recommend you would take that right after the preamp, and that's where you pick it off. A lot of personal monitor systems will allow the user to add EQ and compression to it itself. If you find you need to add EQ and compression, then you can take your mix, your personal monitor mix after EQ and compression on your board. But just be aware that any change you make is actually changing the mix as well. So it's very important. Now, you can see why it's important to keep your techs happy. You give those first 10 minutes up front to your techs so that they can get a good mix, good sound check, so that you can get a personal monitor mix, a good personal monitor mix. If these things aren't set up correctly, you're never going to get a personal monitor mix that sounds good. You're going to be too low. Yourself is going to be too low in the mix, or someone else is going to be too hot, or something like that. So then techs, just real quick, during the service, watch the team. Look for places where they're struggling. And you can tell. They might be pressing their ear like this, or tilting their head. They might be sharp or flat. There's visible frustration. Like I just can't hear well. If you can do something to help them, be aware of that. Be aware of that. Some monitor systems, like LiveMix, Digital Audio Labs LiveMix, have a mirror mix that allows you to go into somebody else's mix and hear what they're hearing. It's a really great tool. I like to have a box like that back at the front of house. So as you're mixing, I can go in and listen to somebody's mix, and they could say, I'm not hearing this. And you go back and you listen to it, and you're like, okay, that's because you only have hi-hats in your mix. Let me help you out. Techs are going to be adjusting the mix for the bodies. The mix is going to change now the bodies are in the room. And then mix dynamically. That's where the conversation with the worship leader is so important, because if it's the keyboard who's leading, you're going to increase the volume there. If it's the guitar player, you're going to increase the volume there. You might decrease other things. So we're mixing dynamically. We're changing how it sounds based on what song. It's not just to set it and forget it. Things change, leaders change, the room changes. So we're mixing dynamically. So now we've talked about the techs and why it's important for them, why they actually impact your personal monitor mix. Now we're going to go into some of the details of a personal monitor mix. There's a number of kinds of mixes, or kinds of monitoring systems. I'm sure you're aware of the big floor wedges that are on the ground. That's kind of how we used to do everything. Now we're moving to more silent stages, and we're using in-ear monitors. You might have a belt pack. You might have an app that allows you to mix. You might have a LiveMix or a Behringer P16 or an Avion type system where you get all your mixes just personal to yourself. There's a lot of different ways, and so we're going to try to be as generic as possible when we're talking about that. One of the key differences is whether it's mono or stereo. A stereo mix is so much easier because when you mix stereo, we can mix with panning. We can move stuff to the left and to the right, and we can declutter a mix by moving things to the left and right. When we mix with mono, you have to do it with EQ. And that's a tough thing even for professionals to do. And especially with modern mixer systems, if you have 16 channels, 24 channels, and you're adjusting the EQ of each one, if you're using like a tablet device or something on your phone, often you don't have that option. And so you're only mixing with levels. It is harder, I'll say that. We're going to give some tips here that I think will help you even if you're mixing in mono. Our recommendation is always to use a personal monitor system like LiveMix or Aviom or something like that. Just allows everybody to get exactly what they need without the technology challenges necessarily. A lot of times we'll use a tablet or a phone because it can be cost effective, but there's connectivity issues. It's not always available. If you're using, let's say your charts are on your tablet and then you're also using it for your mixer, you might in the middle of a song have to switch over, and and they're not user friendly. They look like a professional mixer, and that's just not how most people think of mixing. When we teach mixing, we talk about the very, very basics, even down to what is gain, what is volume, because the sum total of most people on your worship team's mixing is adjusting the EQ in your car, right? And that's just, we all do it the same. We boost the lows, we boost the highs, and we're done. But we can't necessarily do that here. We're starting kind of from scratch, and we want to make sure that we're teaching the foundations and realizing that this isn't a normal thing for people. Mixing audio is not a normal thing for most people on your team. So we want to have a lot of grace with that. So starting from the very, very basics, mixing is just moving volumes up and down. Okay, that's mixing. Panning will be your side-to-side placement. You pan it to the left, you pan it to the right. In a stereo mix, you might call it balance, left and right. We're just going to call it panning. Move it a signal to the left, or move a signal to the right. Mixing, up and down, panning, left and right. Here it is. Here's your core personal mixing 101. What do you need to hear? You're the guitar player, bass player, drummer, vocalist, worship leader, keyboard. What do you need to hear? Number one, less than you think. Okay? We got to practice minimalism. You need to hear less than you think. You need to only hear the essentials that allow you to do what you need to do well. Everything else is a distraction. We're not mixing records, okay? I have yet to hear of a Dove category for best personal monitor mix. I'll amend this when that comes out, but right now we're not mixing records. We're not trying to win awards. We're just trying to hear ourselves really well. We want to be as minimal as possible. Practice scaling it down to only the key things. You don't need to hear everything. What do you need to hear? Well, you need to hear yourself, obviously, right? I need to hear me. Then I need to hear a timing reference. What's the timing? I need to hear a pitch reference so I know that I'm on pitch, that I'm playing the right notes. And I need to hear the leader or the MD, the musical director. I need to be able to hear those four things. Those are really it. Me, timing reference, pitch reference, and the leader. That's it. Those are the things that you need to hear. Now, I hear a lot of times the worship leader will say like, well, I need to hear everybody. In rehearsal, maybe, but you don't. You don't, because again, if someone does something wrong on a Sunday morning, you're not going to turn and glare at them, and it's going to be distracting to you and everybody. You just hear what you need to hear to do your job well. And trust me, if somebody here plays a wrong note, it's obvious. Everyone's going to hear it. It's obvious. You feel it, right? Especially if it's the bass. It just like resonates and echoes your failure. All right, so me, timing reference, pitch reference, the leader. What about the rest? What do we do with everything else? If you got a stereo mix, you pan it to the left and to the right. Move it off center. Make the non-essential channels quieter. And if you can, add some ambience. Ambience is just the room around you. And one of the biggest complaints that folks have, especially when moving into in-ear monitors, is that they can't hear the audience and they can't hear the room, and they can just hear themselves and they feel closed off, which leads to the inevitable popping one ear out, which is not a good idea. Just briefly, let me tell you why. What happens is, let's say, I'm just going to use some round numbers here so it's easy for following. If the stage is 100 decibels loud, you put in your in-ear monitors, they have about a 25 decibel, 26 decibel, we'll say 25 for the math, noise reduction, right? Now you're down to 75. Now, typically we listen to things about 10 decibels over the floor. So now we're listening at about 85 decibels. That's really safe. We can listen to that for a long period of time. All right, so now we're 85 decibels. But I take one ear out. So now I'm at 85 here, I'm at 100 here. But the brain is a great equalizer, and it wants to move everything up over that to that 10 decibels over level. So now I'm going to turn it up actually to 10 decibels over this ear that doesn't have anything in it. Now I'm monitoring at 110 decibels, which is not a good thing. So it is very dangerous actually to take one ear out. What can you do in the meantime? The techs can put two mics. We recommend a condenser mic on the edges of the stage and pointing towards the audience, kind of like this, and then feeding it back as a stereo image through the personal monitor system or through your mixer. So now you can hear things bouncing off the walls. You can hear the audience. It picks up that ambience. So you can add some ambience to it. So me, pitch reference, timing reference, the leader, everything else. Pan, non-essential channels are quieter, and we're going to add some ambience. And I could throw up an image here that shows exactly where to place these on stage, but it's pretty obvious. There's just, these ambient mics are just like this. Some monitor systems have reverb, that helps also. It'll also ambience, and especially for singers, a little bit of ambience and or reverb. Pick one. Don't use both, but that'll help people with their notes. They kind of slide in. If everything's really dry, they, especially vocalists, may have trouble with being pitchy. If you're a tech and you hear someone is very pitchy, it may not be that they're a bad singer. It may be that they need to hear themselves better. It may be that they need to hear a little bit of reverb on their vocal so that you can hear the after effects of where you are and kind of slide into the next note. So we're going to get very, very practical here with a few instruments. Drums. What do you need to hear? We already said the 4 things, right? You need to hear yourself. Now, what is yourself? You've got 20 different pieces here. Good question. Really try to scale it back as much as possible. Stuff is gonna come through your in-ears. You're gonna get some tactical feedback. I would say you get your kick and your snare up and your hats, everything else just kind of less. That's what you hear from yourself. Let's say those 3 things: kick, snare, and hats. The pitch reference, it could be the bass, it could be the lead instrument. It just kind of depends, but you want to hear where the song's going. The timing reference is your click. With personal monitors and in-ears, that has allowed us to use the click, and the click is so important. Most of the time, the person that we find is the most anti-click is going to be the drummer. And I think that they probably think that it's like it's an indictment on their timing, but it's not. What a click allows you to do, especially as a drummer, if you hear that tempo in your head, you can stop playing 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, back in, and everyone comes in at the same time, even though you haven't played. And so the click allows more room, more space. It allows us to breathe a little bit. It allows all the instruments to be on the same page. It allows a keyboard player, let's say, who might be doing arpeggios or something that's tempo synced, to tap in that tempo according to the click and be able to play that. It allows the front of house mixer, who maybe has delay set up, to tap or to be in line with the tempo. They can tap that in because they're listening and can hear that click as well. So a click is really important. It's not an indictment on your timing. It just helps everybody. So yourself, kick, snare, hats, the pitch reference is the bass, lead instrument. You can figure that out, but only pick 1, maybe 2. Your timing reference is a click, and then you hear the leader. What do you need out of an in-ear monitor? You need something that's contoured, probably not flat. You need something with a little bit of a scoop. So you hear that, get that low end. You need a lot of headroom. Headroom is how loud something can be played before it distorts. That kick and bass take up so much energy that a high headroom monitor is really important. Alclair makes a few that are really great for drummers. The CMVK in particular, absolutely love it. As a bass player, it's my go-to. So good headroom, good amounts of low end in your personal monitor. So bass, it's pretty similar. For yourself, obviously it's it's your instrument. Your pitch reference is probably guitar or probably keys. Timing reference, get back to that click. Now you might, if you're not using a click, or you need to fill it out as a bass player, I don't know if it's a timing or a pitch reference. It kind of plays the line as a bass player, but hearing that kick, especially if you're syncopating things, but knowing where the kick and snare is. So I would say you get yourself, you get your pitch from your guitar keys, get a click, kick, and snare. Get those things in your mix, and then your leader. You pretty much need the same thing. Bass players need the same thing as drummers. Good low end, lots of headroom, because that kick and bass is going to take up a lot of space in the mix. Guitar players, obviously yourself, self-explanatory. Pitch reference is going to be the lead instrument, might be the bass, something that you're playing off of. Your timing reference, kick, snare, click, same kind of thing, and the leader. Now, for an in-ear monitor, you need something a little bit probably more flat if you're playing on acoustic. A contour is okay if you're playing electric. A lot of guitar players kind of dig that scoop mid. We've kind of been trained on the scoop mid a little bit, so that's okay to be contoured. You don't need as much headroom as the bass players and drummers, so you have a lot more options there. And I like something with just a little bit of a contour in the low and a little bit of contour in the middle, just slightly, is a great monitor for guitar players. Keys, kind of going to start sounding redundant here. Yourself, your lead instrument or guitar is your pitch reference. Your timing reference is going to be probably the kick, snare, and click, and then you need to hear the leader. Again, everything else gets panned off left and right. Pads, for example. Unless you're the pad player, you probably don't need to hear the pads. You can turn those pretty low in your mix. Pan them, if it's stereo, to the left and to the right. Guitar players, you might move your guitar just a little to the left, the kick and the snare right up the middle. Then your pitch or reference kind of over here. So you're spacing it out a little bit, giving it some pan. Here's a chart I can throw up here that shows a little bit about that. So yeah, think about your space here. So in the middle of any mix, and well, let me go through this. I'll go through the song leaders and I'll come back to that. Song leaders, yourself, you need to hear your keys or guitar as your pitch reference, probably. Click, kick, snare, leader, talkback. What do you need? All right, let's go back to keys. I didn't say what they needed in a monitor. A key player is going to need something flat and accurate. It's a very wide instrument, and so if you're playing lows, you need to be able to hear those just as well as the highs. Yes, I know we kind of stick to about 2 octaves in church keyboards, but having something very flat across the spectrum is important so that nothing is emphasized over another. Now back to song leaders. What you need is probably a little bit of boost in the upper end where your vocal lives, so it just kind of jumps out of the mix. But generally, something flat. We say accurate, meaning it reproduces something as it sounds like in the master. So another word we could say flat, we could say accurate, we could say balanced. Those are all kind of the same thing. If you get something that's contoured, with that little scoop, it's more fun, it's more dynamic, it's more engaging. So a lot of times a song leader, especially if you're playing an instrument and singing, you want something a little contoured to kind of feel it. It does really help, just even a very subtle scooping kind of like this, like Alclar's Spire model, for example. Just a very subtle scoop, but it brings us engagement and dynamics to it and makes things kind of fun. Vocalists, yourself, obviously. Now your pitch reference could be a lead vocal. It could be the harmony vocal, depending on what you're playing or what your role is. Again, timing is going to be click and snare, click, kick, and snare. You need to reword those. It's kind of hard to say. For vocalists, you need something similar to the song leader. A little bit of emphasis upper here. Be careful of a hard upper end. Sometimes a vocal monitor might be really clear and articulate at the top, but that also means it can be bright and it can get fatiguing over time. So you don't need something overly articulate, but you just need a little bit of a boost in that upper end in order to allow your vocal just to kind of float on top of the mix a little bit. So going back then to placement real quick, here we'll throw up this chart that just kind of shows where in the stereo field things might want to go. Typically, we want to put you right up in the center, maybe over to the left or to the right just a little bit, but you're right up there. Your kick and snare are generally right up the middle, and the bass is usually right up the middle. Hi-hats can be panned. I actually pan my snare a little bit. I'm going to put my hi-hats over here and snare if I'm using them. So then everything else is subjective based on what you're playing. So if you're the keyboard player, your keys are going to be right up front. You might put your rhythm guitar far to the right and lead guitar far to the left. Your toms should always be spaced out. Just space them out, hard left, hard right, and maybe something over here. Just start moving things around, and you'll find that as you move things, because mono is all right here, and as you move things out, your mix is going to get much clearer, and you're going to be able to hear things better. When we talked about earlier, practice minimalism, think through that. We're not, if you can't hear something well, you can't hear yourself well, you can't hear your pitch reference well, consider turning everything else down instead of turning your pitch reference up. And the more you can kind of keep everything else lower, the more you're going to be able to hear the things that are absolutely essential to what you're doing. If you have a personal monitor system, make sure you save after the rehearsal so that when you load in on Sunday morning, everything's going to work out much better, and it's going to load up where you were, and you're not going to have that 10 decibel thing. So, all right, we've covered a lot of ground. Here is a QR code if you want to scan this to get a PDF to share with your team. Just to recap, though, here's what we need to do. Give everyone enough time to practice at home. Show up on time to rehearsal, and on time means you're ready on stage at the downbeat. You're ready at 8 o'clock, everyone's ready. Now, this is a good time to spend the first 5 minutes or so just kind of going through with the team. You can say, hey, is there something on anybody's mind? Let's pray before we jump into this and get some of those things off their minds, just to kind of focus again. Then let's move into our sound check, where we're giving the text 5-10 minutes, but we're doing it while we're playing a familiar song. That's kind of what we're keyed up for. Get that familiar song that everyone knows. Do a few minutes of the sound check. Let the text run it. The text say bass. Everyone else quiet. Keys. If you just give them 5 minutes, they can do it in 5 minutes. But if you don't, it's going to take 20. So just give the text time up front. Now, jump into your familiar song. Everyone can dial in their personal monitor mixes there. So 5 minutes, let's say with prayer, 5 minutes, 5-10 minutes for the tech time. Let's give them 10, so we're at 15 minutes. Let's go 5 minutes into your rehearsal, your familiar song, right? So now we're 20 minutes into it, but you were all there early. You're all starting on time. Typically, you're not even starting till half an hour after because people are just coming in late, you're spending a long time doing sound check. Start doing these things. Put these into practice because it's going to help Sunday morning immensely. I'm not kidding. So practice. Everyone gets stuff early. We show up on time, and on time means the downbeat at the time rehearsal starts. Give the text time to make their mixes. Familiar song, and do your personal monitor mixes during that familiar song. Then you can go into your new song. Then you can spend some time. But now let's say you had an hour and a half practice. You've still got, what is it, the calculation, 70 minutes? 70 minutes to work on those new songs and transitions. So it's about honoring everybody's time, taking that stuff back. Again, we've got some of the resources here are going to be available. We're happy to answer any questions you have at Alclair or Digital Audio Labs with Live Mix. Those folks are overly helpful if you have any questions. Yeah, I think that's about it. I know that's a lot. So thanks for being here, guys. And again, hit us up if you have questions. We're more than happy to answer any questions. We're not, Alclair in particular, we'd love to sell you monitors for sure. But our main thing is let's get you into something that's going to help you perform your best and be confident and help everybody experience the presence of God a little bit more. All right, guys, thanks. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Andy, and thank you for attending. As always, if you have any questions, please address them to me at glass@worshipfacility.com, and we'll get you some answers. Thanks again to Andy Swanson of All Clear Audio, and thank you for attending.